My wife broke my heart when I saw her dancing with her lover at the town party. She twirled to the music, her eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. His lips curved into a smile that was no longer mine. Every step she took, every touch she exchanged with that man, was a stab in my soul. I stood there, still, feeling my entire body fill with anger, with disgust, with disbelief. My world was crumbling before my eyes and no one seemed to notice. While everyone around me was laughing, toasting, and having fun, I felt like I was falling into an endless abyss. She didn't even notice my presence, or maybe she did and just didn't care. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The way she looked at him, as if she were surrendered, as if that moment was unique, as if I had never existed. And I, there, just a shadow, a spectator of the disaster itself. I clenched my fists and walked towards them. The loud music made the voices disappear, but each laugh felt like a slap in the face. When I stopped next to them, she finally looked at me. The smile disappeared instantly, replaced by sudden terror. Her lover stopped too, frowning but not letting go of her waist. My heart was beating hard, as if it wanted to get out of my chest, but my voice came out firm, sharp, definitive. You destroyed our family. Now you are free to live your life with this guy. I want a divorce and I will have custody of our children. The words hung heavy in the air, falling like a sentence, like an irrevocable verdict. I saw her eyes widen, fear growing on her face, but there was nothing left to say. I didn't want to hear explanations, excuses, lies. I had already seen everything I needed to see. I left there without looking back, with my heart pounding with pain, but with the certainty that that was the only possible choice. But betrayal is not something you forget. It corrodes from the inside, burns like acid, destroys trust in everything. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was what came after. It was seeing our children's confused faces as they tried to understand what was happening. It was facing lawyers, lawsuits, fights, tears. It was hearing his trembling voice trying to negotiate, trying to backtrack, trying to convince me that it wasn't what it seemed. It was a mistake. I was confused. It doesn't mean anything. I love you, it was just a slip, please don't do this. But it was too late. I couldn't go back to someone who had already stabbed me in the back. It wasn't just a slip-up. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And choices have consequences. However, what I didn't expect was the final blow. The moment when her betrayal would take a greater toll than she could have imagined. She didn't just lose her husband. Not only did he lose respect. She lost something she could never get back. I didn't need to take revenge, because life took care of it for me. It was a slow, cruel, merciless punishment. And when she realized what she had done, when she came to terms with the consequences of her actions, it was too late. Too late. What happened to her? What did she lose besides me? You know what they say about karma, don't you? Some betrayals are like fire. They burn everything around, leaving only ashes. Others are like quicksand. The more you try to escape, the deeper you sink. And she, well, she didn't know she still had a lot to lose. But he learned. In the worst possible way. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support cheating in no way. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the pain, disappointment and consequences are real. The objective is to show how betrayal destroys lives, families and trust, leaving marks that not even time can erase. Now, get ready for a shocking story, full of twists and intense emotions. Listen carefully, what happens next may surprise you. Night was slowly falling over the city, spreading a cool breeze that shook the curtains of Michael and Olivia's house. The house, spacious and well-kept, was a reflection of the life they had built together over the years. It felt solid, stable, a real home. But the walls hid stories that went beyond the family photos hanging in the living room. Inside, between those walls that once housed vows of love and promises of eternity, something invisible was growing, a crack so thin that it still couldn't be seen with the naked eye, but that one day would be impossible to ignore. Michael was sitting on the couch, his eyes fixed on a document on the table, but his mind was wandering. Work, bills, marriage, children. Everything seemed like an endless cycle of responsibilities, and even though I was a dedicated man, I felt like something was different. Olivia was passing through the living room towards the kitchen, and he was watching her without her noticing. She had always been a charming woman, full of life, and still was, but it seemed that lately something in her had changed. The sparkle in his eyes, the energy, the way he smiled. It wasn't an abrupt change, but a subtle, almost imperceptible one. In the first years of their marriage, everything between them was intense, full of passion and plans for the future. He remembered how they met, the conversations that went on into the early hours of the morning, the feeling of having found the right person to share his life with. Michael was a determined, hard-working man who did everything he could to give Olivia and her children a comfortable life. I spent extra hours at the office, accumulating career achievements, ensuring that nothing was missing. But over time, he realized that this dedication came with a price. The time he spent away from home seemed to grow every year, and when he was finally there, he felt like something between him and Olivia was no longer the same. Not that there were constant fights or aggressive arguments. It was a silent distance, an invisible space growing between them, filled with superficial conversations and prolonged silences. Olivia was a strong, independent woman. She had always been passionate about life, movement, the feeling of experiencing something new. She had her own career, her own ambitions, but for years she prioritized her family, her children, her husband. However, now, she seemed to have looked at herself in a different way again. I spent more time outside, involved in community events, meetings, parties that I would never have shown interest in before. Michael tried not to bother, tried to believe that it was just a phase, that all marriages had moments like this. But deep down, there was something that worried him, something he couldn't explain. The couple's children were their greatest happiness. 2 children who lit up the house, bringing laughter and the chaotic energy that only children are capable of spreading. Michael made a point of being present at important moments, even when work overwhelmed him. On the weekends, I tried to make up for lost time, taking them to the park, playing in the backyard, watching movies with the family. But lately, I noticed that Olivia was more absent from these little traditions. She went out more often, and when she was home, her mind seemed to be elsewhere. Sometimes he would catch her gaze, as if she were reflecting on something far away, and when he asked her what she was thinking, she would just smile vaguely and change the subject. That night, while they were having dinner together, Michael tried to start a conversation, but Olivia responded in a monosyllabic way. Occasionally, he would look at his cell phone, quickly type a message and go back to pretending to be attentive to his meal. He felt a tightness in his chest, but swallowed the discomfort. I didn't want to be that jealous, controlling husband. It never was. I trusted Olivia. Always trusted. But something didn't feel right. When the children were asleep and the house fell into silence, Michael watched her getting ready in front of the mirror. She chose a different dress than usual, put on a strong perfume, and fixed her hair with special care. He leaned against the doorframe and tried to hide his uneasiness. "Are you going out?" he asked, trying to sound unconcerned. Olivia smiled lightly, without hesitation. "Yes, there is a party in town. An important event. It will be good to make contacts." He nodded slowly. "I thought we went together." She shook her head, closing the lipstick with a soft click. "I thought you were tired." "You're always tired these days." Those words hit him in a strange way. He knew he worked a lot, that sometimes he came home exhausted, but did that mean he didn't want to be with her? "I wanted." He crossed his arms and forced a smile. "I could go. Hang out together for a bit." Olivia laughed softly, picking up her bag. No need if it's just out of obligation. I know these parties aren't really your style. He was silent for a moment. Had he really lost interest in going out, having fun with her? Or was it something more? She said goodbye with a quick kiss and left, leaving a trail of perfume in the air. Michael stood still, watching the door close, feeling an uneasiness growing inside him. The clock was almost midnight when he took out his cell phone and opened social media. Photos of the party were already starting to appear. People smiling, toasting, having fun. And then, an image caught his attention. A photo of Olivia, laughing, dancing. Something about her expression, the way she looked at someone outside the frame, made his stomach turn. He took a deep breath and tried to push away the irrational thoughts. But something inside him already knew. Something inside him screamed, warning him that that night would change everything. He just didn't know how yet. The weeks passed with a weight that Michael couldn't name. Ever since that night Olivia left for the town party, a deep discomfort had settled inside him. It wasn't just distrust, it was something bigger, something that was growing silently, infiltrating his mind in a way he couldn't control. He tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that everything was fine. But then came the signs. Small, almost imperceptible, but together they began to form an image that he didn't want to see. Olivia looked different. Not in a blatant way, not in an obvious way, but he felt it. Her cell phone now felt like an extension of her hand, something she never let go of, something she always kept face down when she was near it. Outings became more frequent, appointments became increasingly vague, without many explanations. When he asked, she smiled, looked him in the eyes and responded naturally, as if he were just imagining things. But Michael knew that smile, that look, well, and he couldn't ignore what he felt. That night, he watched her get ready again. The new dress, the stronger perfume, the careful makeup. Something inside him twisted uncomfortably, but he didn't say anything. He just waited, like he always did. Olivia grabbed her car keys and gave him a quick kiss before leaving behind a silence that seemed deafening. Michael stayed there for a few minutes, just looking at the closed door, feeling the weight of that moment on his shoulders. He knew something was wrong. I knew I needed to do something. But I was still reluctant, I still wanted to believe that it was all just paranoia. He got up, picked up his cell phone and took a deep breath. He opened social media and started searching, something he had never done before, something that made him feel ridiculous, but that, at the same time, seemed necessary. He scrolled slowly, looking at the photos and comments. Then he saw an image. Olivia was there, in a restaurant he didn't know, surrounded by friends. But there was something about the photo that made his heart stop for a moment. A small but glaring detail. Someone's hand rested on her leg, in a casual but intimate way. It wasn't just any gesture. It was a touch he knew, a touch he had done many times before. The blood rushed to his head. He felt his stomach turn. The name of the restaurant was marked in the publication. He didn't think, just took the car keys and left. The ride to the restaurant seemed longer than it should have been. The streets seemed darker, the weather heavier. Michael's heart was pounding, his hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly, as if that would stop him from falling apart. He didn't want to believe it, he didn't want to see it, but something inside him needed confirmation. He parked a few meters from the entrance, took a deep breath and got out of the car. The noise of the night filled the environment, laughter and conversations mixed with the sound of music coming from the restaurant. He entered without being noticed, walking with slow steps, eyes scanning the place in search of her. And then he saw her. Sitting at a more private table, smiling, talking, and next to her, the man who now had his hand on hers, caressing her subtly. The world around Michael seemed to go silent. He stood still, watching the scene, feeling the ground open beneath his feet. Olivia leaned closer to the man, touching his arm, laughing at something he said. It was a real laugh, a laugh he hadn't seen in a long time. Michael's chest tightened. He felt the betrayal burning inside him like a poison, eating away at his skin, choking his lungs. I wanted to move forward, I wanted to scream, I wanted to pull her away, but her body wouldn't move. The minutes seemed like an eternity. Her every gesture, every look exchanged, every stolen touch, everything felt like a dagger piercing her soul. He didn't need to hear anything, he didn't need more proof. The truth was before his eyes, open, brutal, irrefutable. Not only was Olivia cheating on him, but she was doing it in a way that showed that it wasn't new, that it had been happening long enough for her to feel comfortable, for this other man to feel natural around her. The pain that gripped Michael wasn't just anger, it wasn't just hate. It was a collapse. It was the feeling of having been erased, of having been replaced without even realizing it. The man he was, the husband he always tried to be, suddenly meant nothing. He stood there, breathing deeply, trying to control the hurricane that was forming inside him. But then, Olivia looked up. Her eyes met his. The smile on his face instantly disappeared. Panic crossed his expression. The man next to him noticed the change and followed his gaze, finding Michael there, standing still, watching everything. The silence that followed was crushing. Michael felt something inside him break once and for all. Something irreversible. He didn't look away, didn't blink, didn't move. He just kept his eyes fixed on hers, letting her know that he had seen, that he knew. And then, he turned and left, without saying a word. Olivia stood up immediately, calling his name, but he didn't stop. He walked outside, feeling the cold night against his warm face, feeling the weight of a truth that could never be undone. He got into the car and slammed the door. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His hands shook on the steering wheel. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. And then, Olivia appeared outside the restaurant, looking around desperately, looking for him. The man came out after her, holding her arm, trying to say something. Michael watched everything from behind the windshield, feeling the bitter taste of betrayal filling his mouth. She finally saw him inside the car, and started walking towards him. But before she could get any closer, Michael started the engine and accelerated, leaving her behind. The city lights blurred through the glass, his thoughts buzzed inside his head. The pain he felt was not just from the betrayal itself, but from the certainty that everything they had built, everything they had lived through, was now nothing more than a pile of rubble. And as he drove aimlessly, lost in his own storm, he knew this was just the first part of the destruction. Because the worst was yet to come. Michael didn't sleep that night. The weight of what he had witnessed corroded his thoughts like rust, a slow and irreversible corrosion. He drove for hours, aimlessly, just trying to push away the anger that burned in his chest, the betrayal that pulsed like an open wound. Olivia's face, the look in her eyes when she saw him in the restaurant, the expression of shock followed by the desperation of running after him, all of that replayed like a worn-out movie in his mind. He wondered how long it had been happening, since when she deceived him with that man, since when her hugs, her kisses, her body, belonged to someone else. And more than anything, he wondered what had been real. If the years at her side had been just a well-rehearsed theater, if every "I love you" said in the last few months was nothing more than an empty echo, a lie thrown to the wind. He wanted to face her, he wanted to hear the truth from her mouth, he wanted to see if she would have the courage to deny what her own eyes had seen. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, Michael decided to return home. The adrenaline from the night before had turned into heavy exhaustion, but he knew he needed to face Olivia. Upon entering the house, he found a strange silence. He expected to see her there, perhaps sitting on the sofa, perhaps waiting for him in the kitchen with a guilty look. But the living room was empty, the kitchen without signs of life. He went up the stairs, his steps slow and heavy. The bedroom door was ajar, and when he pushed it open, he found Olivia sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes red from crying. He stood still for a moment, just watching, feeling the anger rising inside him again. But he didn't say anything. Just waited. Olivia looked up, and for a second, he saw the fear there. Not afraid of him, but afraid of the truth. Fear of what would come next. She took a deep breath before speaking, her voice breaking at first, hesitant. She said she wanted to explain, that everything was not what it seemed, that he needed to listen to her before making any decision. Michael laughed, but it wasn't a humorous laugh. It was a bitter laugh, a laugh from someone who had already heard every possible excuse. He crossed his arms and waited, daring her to try to justify the unjustifiable. Olivia started to speak, trying to compose a version that would lessen the impact of what she had done, but Michael interrupted. He didn't want to beat around the bush, he didn't want empty words. He wanted the truth. And then, after a few seconds of suffocating silence, she relented. She admitted that she was involved with another man, that it hadn't just been a moment, that it had been happening for some time. She tried to say that she never wanted to hurt him, that she never planned any of this, that it just happened. But Michael didn't want to hear that. He wanted to understand how someone who promised love, loyalty and partnership could throw it all away as if it meant nothing. The argument took over the room, heavy words being thrown from one side to the other. Olivia said she felt alone, that he was always busy, that their marriage had become a monotonous cycle. Michael countered, saying that everything he did was for her, for their children, for the life they built together. But then, in the midst of that storm of accusations, of exposed pain, Olivia released something that made Michael's floor disappear beneath his feet. Something that made everything he felt up until then seem small. Custody of children. He blinked, not immediately understanding. Olivia hesitated, but then said it all at once, as if ripping a bandage off an open wound. She couldn't lose her children. She knew he was going to file for divorce, she knew he would fight for them, she knew that if she went to court, she would lose. And then, he confessed. He confessed that he already knew this even before the betrayal was discovered, that he had been preparing for this moment, that he had made a decision that he could not take back. Michael felt his entire body go cold, as if his soul was being ripped from within him. Olivia had begun proceedings to reverse custody. She had filed documents claiming that he was absent, that he was always traveling, that raising the children fell exclusively to her. And more than that, she would use whatever was necessary to prove it. Witnesses, records, any detail that could build this narrative. He looked at her, unable to believe what he was hearing. The betrayal was cruel enough, but this? She was trying to take him away from his own children. The silence that followed was worse than any words spoken before. Olivia lowered her head, perhaps expecting an outburst of anger, screams, accusations. But Michael didn't say anything. He didn't scream, he didn't move. He just stood there, feeling the world around him fall apart. He realized, right then and there, that the woman before him was no longer the same one he loved. Maybe it never would have been. He thought about his children, the moments he came home and hugged them after a tiring day, the way they laughed together, the stories they told before bed. And now, Olivia wanted to erase all of that. He wanted to make them believe that he was a distant father, that he didn't deserve to have them in his life. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but filled with something she had never heard before. A cold, unchanging certainty. He wouldn't let that happen. He would fight until the end. She could have betrayed him, she could have deceived him, she could have thrown the marriage away, but she would never take him away from his children. Olivia tried to say something, tried to justify herself once again, but he raised his hand, silencing her. There was nothing more to be said. He turned and left the room, leaving her sitting there, wrapped in her own guilt. But Olivia didn't seem sorry for the betrayal. She seemed sorry for being discovered. Michael walked down the stairs feeling the weight of each step, but something inside him had changed. He was no longer a broken man. He was a man ready to fight. And this time, it wasn't for Olivia. It wasn't because of the marriage he once had. It was for the children. For what was left. And he wouldn't lose. Not this time. Michael didn't leave the house right away. He needed to think, needed to compose himself before taking any action. He went up to the children's room, entered without making a sound and observed every detail. The toys scattered around, the children's drawings hanging on the wall, the little shoes in the corner of the carpet. Their children slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm brewing between their parents. He knelt down next to the youngest's bed and stayed there for a while, feeling the child's slow, rhythmic breathing. How could Olivia be capable of something so cruel? How could she want to keep him away from his children? Betrayal was one thing, but this was monstrous. He felt a tightness in his chest, a suffocating anguish, and then, finally, he knew what he needed to do. The next morning, Michael had made up his mind. I wouldn't wait for Olivia to take the next step. He had contacts, knew lawyers, and knew he couldn't give her room to win this battle. As soon as the sun began to illuminate the house, he took out his cell phone and started making calls. Meanwhile, Olivia came downstairs and found him in the living room, sitting stiffly, eyes fixed on his phone screen. She paused at the door for a moment, as if preparing for a clash. What are you doing? Her voice sounded low, but loaded with tension. Michael didn't look up. Getting ready, he replied coldly. Olivia took a deep breath, crossed her arms and approached. It doesn't have to be like this, his voice now sounded softer, almost pleading. We can resolve this in a civilized manner. He finally looked up at her, and the look he gave her made her flinch a little. Civilized? He repeated, letting out a dry laugh. How is trying to take my children away from me behind my back civilized? She didn't respond right away. He bit his lower lip, looking away. I just wanted to make sure they had stability. That they wouldn't be dragged into this horrible situation. Don't you dare justify that. His voice was firmer now, full of calculated control. You didn't do it for them. You did it for you. He did it because he knew he would lose. I knew I had no chance of fighting for them fairly. So he tried to cheat. Olivia ran her hands over her face, as if trying to hold back the emotions that were beginning to overflow. I made mistakes, I know. But Michael, we can't make this a war. I don't want the boys to go through this. You don't want to. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You already put them in the middle of this war the moment you decided to do this. She looked at him for a long time, as if searching for something in him, perhaps some weakness, some openness. But what he found was only the certainty that Michael would not back down. What do you want, then? His voice was now a whisper, filled with obvious exhaustion. I want a divorce, he said without hesitation. And I want custody of our children. You can see them, you can be part of their lives, but I no longer trust you to be the responsible figure. She opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. You've already made it clear that you're willing to do anything to get what you want. I cannot allow this. So, you have two options, either we enter into a legal dispute where I guarantee that all your lies and betrayals will be exposed, or you accept a settlement that maintains at least some dignity. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Do you want to destroy me? His voice was shaky. Michael shook his head. I just want to protect my children. She ran her hand through her hair, took a deep breath and tried to find some answer, some way out that would still favor her. But there was nothing else. She knew she had lost. The silence between the two was interrupted by the sound of Michael's phone vibrating on the table. He looked at the screen and answered immediately. Yes, I'm on my way. He got up, grabbed his car keys and walked to the door. Olivia watched him, eyes wide. What are you going to do? He stopped and looked at her over his shoulder. I will ensure that justice is served. And then he left, leaving her there, surrounded only by the weight of her own choices. Michael left there with a decision made, but every step he took towards the car seemed to tear pieces of his soul away. As he started the vehicle and headed towards the lawyer's office, his mind relived every moment he lived with Olivia, from the happy and promising beginning, to the bitter sensation of betrayal. Even with all the anger and hurt, I couldn't deny that I had deeply loved that woman, who had shared with her dreams, plans, and a whole life built on trust and respect. Now all he was left with was the sad realization that this life had been destroyed by choices he had no control over, decisions he had never imagined coming from someone who swore to love him forever. In the office, Michael sat in front of the lawyer, briefly recounting the facts, his voice sounding firm despite the deep emotional exhaustion he felt. Every word said there seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 years of pain, but he didn't hesitate. He knew exactly what he needed to do to protect the only thing that still made sense, his children. The lawyer listened to him attentively, taking specific and objective notes, preparing to face a legal battle that already seemed won before it even started. However, when he finished speaking, Michael saw a different expression on the experienced man's face, a silent doubt that he didn't immediately understand. The lawyer took a deep breath before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "Michael, do you really want to go down this path? I don't doubt that we can win this battle, but I want you to be aware of what it means. This legal war may protect your children from Olivia, but it won't protect you from the pain that will come from learning what happened between you. There is no victory without loss in cases like this." Those words hit Michael like a blow to the stomach, bringing him a dilemma that until then he had not fully considered. As he walked home, Michael felt a growing weight on his shoulders. He was fully aware that his decision would not only affect him and Olivia, but would completely define his children's emotional future. What would life be like for children after a public battle between their parents, where every humiliating detail would be exposed in front of everyone? Would they ever be able to forgive him for this exposure, even if he was just trying to protect them? Doubt consumed his soul in an overwhelming way, throwing him into an internal conflict that seemed to have no easy or fair solution. Every mile he walked home was accompanied by a deeper doubt, by a gut-wrenching uncertainty that he couldn't silence. Michael knew justice was on his side, but was justice worth the price his children would pay for it? When he arrived home, he found the children playing peacefully in the backyard, innocent and completely oblivious to the emotional devastation that surrounded the family. The sight of them, happy and carefree, made his chest feel almost unbearable. Sitting on the porch, he watched them, trying to imagine how he would explain it all. "I knew that one day they would ask why their parents had separated, why they had been subjected to something so painful. They would ask who was to blame, who had destroyed that fragile and precious happiness." And Michael realized, at that moment, that his biggest battle would not be against Olivia in the courts, but against himself. Against the pain of betrayal, against the almost uncontrollable impulse for revenge, and against the visceral desire to protect their children at any cost, even knowing that perhaps this protection could hurt them deeply. Hours later, Olivia returned home. A heavy silence took over the residence, broken only by the movements of the children who went upstairs to sleep, completely innocent in the face of their parents' emotional chaos. Olivia sat silently next to Michael, maintaining a respectful distance, as if she understood that any closeness would be inappropriate at this time. His voice was filled with sincere tiredness when he finally spoke. "Michael, I know I no longer have the right to ask you for anything, but please, before we do anything, think carefully about the children. I know I made a mistake, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but they don't need to suffer any more because of my mistakes. Do what you want with me, but spare them this." Michael remained motionless, listening to those words, feeling an overwhelming mix of feelings within himself. The anger was still there, pulsing through his veins like fire, but now it was accompanied by a deep regret. That woman who was now begging for mercy was not just someone who had betrayed him, she was also the mother of his children, someone he had loved and who, in some way, was still part of the life they built. For the first time since the beginning of that situation, Michael found himself faced with a choice that was no longer about revenge or justice, but about what really mattered, protecting or exposing those he loved most at the emotional cost of the absolute truth. He took a deep breath before answering, measuring each word with extreme care. "Olivia, you're right about one thing, our children are not to blame for what happened between us. But that doesn't mean I can just forget everything and pretend it never happened. I will never be able to forgive you fully, that's a fact. What you did can't be erased, but maybe I need to understand that not all battles can be won without causing even greater damage. Olivia looked up at him, trying to contain the tears that insisted on streaming down her face. What do you mean by that? He asked with a trembling voice, looking for some hope in that answer. Michael looked up at the starry sky, took a deep breath, feeling within himself a whirlwind of emotions that slowly consumed him. It means I still don't know what I'm going to do, Olivia. It means I need time to decide whether to fight this battle against you, or whether I find a way to protect my children without completely destroying the image they have of their mother. Those words hovered between them, like a heavy veil of silence and reflection. Neither of them said anything else that night, both knowing they had reached a point of no return, where every choice carried with it consequences impossible to predict. As he went up to his room, Michael felt torn, knowing that the dilemma before him was too complex to be resolved hastily or motivated by immediate anger. All he was left with was the certainty that any decision he made would be a path of no return, and that he would need to find the strength within himself to deal with the results of that choice. As he lay in bed, alone and deep in thought, Michael felt silent tears running down his face, not for the betrayal he suffered or the loss of his marriage, but for the deep pain of knowing that, regardless of what he chose, that scar would remain open forever in their lives, shaping the future of everyone around them. The night progressed slowly, and he knew that, soon, he would have to face the most difficult decision of his entire life. In the following days, Michael decided to temporarily move away from the emotional chaos that took place in his home, taking his children to visit his parents in a neighboring city. The comfort of the old home, the family's serenity and the peaceful presence of the grandparents seemed to ease the burden of the situation on the children, giving them space to enjoy a momentary calm. Michael, however, felt far from that relief. No matter how much he tried to distract himself with trivial conversations and walks around the town where he grew up, his mind remained tied to the dilemma that haunted him, the issue that seemed impossible to resolve without someone being deeply hurt. The guilt of dragging his children into that crisis, although involuntary, consumed him inside. He tried to hide it in front of his parents, who had already realized that something was terribly wrong, although they preferred not to pressure him at that moment. One night, while the children were asleep and their parents were watching a movie in the living room, Michael sat alone in the backyard, contemplating the starry sky as he used to do as a teenager. The cool breeze brought back distant memories, happy moments when life seemed simpler. In the midst of these memories, his father appeared silently, settling down next to him, respecting his silence for a few minutes before speaking calmly. Michael, your mother and I realize that you are carrying something very heavy. You don't have to tell us everything, but know that you are not alone in this fight. Michael sighed deeply, keeping his eyes fixed on the darkness. He hesitated to share the truth, afraid of disappointing his parents, afraid of revealing to them the fragility he had never shown. However, the serenity in his father's voice was like an irresistible invitation, an open door to release some of the pain he carried with him. Olivia cheated on me, he said softly, almost in a whisper, as if admitting it out loud made it all the more real. But the problem is bigger than that. She's trying to use the situation to take the children, and I don't know how to resolve this without causing even more suffering. His father listened silently, demonstrating calm and understanding as he absorbed the gravity of his son's words. Finally, he placed a firm hand on his shoulder, carefully choosing his words before responding. Son, throughout my life, I've learned that we don't always have control over other people's decisions. But we do have control over how we react to those decisions. You've always been strong, you've always known right from wrong. But sometimes, right isn't what seems fairest at first. Sometimes, we need to think beyond the immediate pain and see which decision will leave your conscience at peace in the future. Michael slowly turned to his father, his expression filled with doubt. But what if protecting my children means exposing their mother in a way that will destroy her forever in front of them? He asked in a choked voice, revealing for the first time the deep fear that haunted him. His father gently squeezed his shoulder, giving him reassurance and understanding. That's a decision no one can make for you, Michael. But remember, protecting your children doesn't always mean protecting them from the truth, sometimes it means teaching them how to deal with it. Olivia made a serious mistake, but it's also true that your children deserve a mother, even an imperfect one. Think about this before you decide whether to completely destroy her image. That same night, lying in his childhood bed, Michael struggled with insomnia, his mind dominated by deep reflections on his father's words. She knew there was a painful wisdom in them, that perhaps true courage was not in attacking Olivia with all her strength, but in choosing a path that would preserve as much as possible the dignity of the mother of her children, despite everything that had happened. It was no longer just about justice or revenge, but about the possibility of teaching children something valuable, that forgiveness and understanding, although difficult, were possible even in the worst circumstances. But would he be prepared to give up his legitimate desire to punish her? The next day, he decided to return home with his children, feeling a little more serene, although still uncertain about what he would do. Upon entering, he noticed that Olivia seemed to have lived through days as painful as he had, her tired and haggard expression showing sleepless nights and deep sadness. Surprisingly, she showed no resistance when she saw the children, welcoming them with a welcoming smile, disguising her pain with the skill of someone who wanted to protect them. After the children ran into the yard, Olivia slowly approached, looking hesitant but determined to say something important. "Michael, I'm not going to apologize again because I know it wouldn't do any good. But I've thought a lot these days and I want you to know that no matter what I decide to do from now on, I'm not going to fight you for custody of the children anymore. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I love our children more than anything. I don't want them to be hurt any further in this battle. Do what you think is best and I'll respect it." Her voice was filled with a rare sincerity, something Michael hadn't heard from her in a long time. Michael watched her for a long time before responding, trying to decipher if that was a sincere surrender or a trick to soften him up. But Olivia's eyes reflected only sincerity and resignation. "You know that despite everything, I would never stop you from seeing them. They need you in their lives, regardless of what happened to us. I don't want to destroy you, Olivia, but I don't know if I can just forget." Her response was immediate and frank. "I don't even expect that, Michael. I just wanted you to know that I understand the consequences of my actions, and that I accept whatever comes now, as long as the children are safe." He nodded silently, realizing that perhaps, for the first time since it all began, a gap of understanding had opened between them. It was still too early to completely decide which path he would follow, but he felt relieved to see genuine regret in her. Maybe, despite all the suffering, there was a way to reorganize his life without hurting those he loved even more. However, before he could say anything else, the phone rang abruptly, interrupting that fragile moment of understanding. When Michael answered, he heard the lawyer's firm voice on the other end, saying something unexpected. "Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you need to come to my office immediately. We've received something worrying related to the process, and I think it's best if we talk in person." When he hung up, his heart raced again, overcome by anxiety and fear of what would come next. Olivia immediately noticed his uneasiness and looked at him apprehensively. "What happened?" she asked, with evident concern. Michael took a deep breath, trying to regain control over his emotions before responding. "I don't know yet, but it looks like this story isn't completely over yet." He left quickly, leaving Olivia perplexed and worried in the room, not sure what else could have gone wrong. As he drove to his lawyer's office, Michael again felt the crushing weight of uncertainty and feared what might lie ahead. He knew that, regardless of what it was, the final decision would be getting closer, and the fate of everyone he loved would depend exclusively on the courage he demonstrated at that decisive moment. When Michael arrived at the lawyer's office, his expression was a mixture of anxiety and determination. Sitting in front of him, he silently listened to what the lawyer revealed in a heavy and serious voice. Documents had reached him, sent by someone close to Olivia's lover, revealing delicate and extremely compromising information. The man Olivia had gotten involved with had a complicated history, huge debts and several fraud lawsuits. Furthermore, he was clearly interested in using Olivia as part of a scam to extort money from her family. Michael listened to everything without interrupting, feeling invaded by a strange sense of compassion for Olivia, even after everything she had been through. After all, despite the betrayal, he knew that Olivia would never deserve something as perverse as being the victim of a scam that could ruin her life permanently. Michael decided to act quickly. He left immediately and drove to Olivia's work, finding her in the middle of the day. When she saw him, she was scared, believing that he brought more problems with him, but when she noticed his worried expression, something in her trembled. He quickly explained what he had discovered, seeing a look of shock and deep humiliation in her eyes. Olivia couldn't believe that she had been deceived like that her neediness and emotional fragility had made her an easy victim. Michael didn't condemn her at that moment, because he realized that she was already carrying a huge weight, the pain of guilt now multiplied by the shame of having been used in that way. With calmness and maturity, Michael offered support to Olivia to resolve the situation. It was no longer about marriage or what was left of it, it was about dignity, respect and protection for the mother of his children. Michael decided to help her report the man and resolve all the legal problems that arose from the discovery. Over the next few weeks, he stood by her side, accompanying her to hearings, providing documents and testimony, helping her find the strength to stand up again, even if it was only as an act of respect for the children they shared. Olivia, despite being grateful, knew that closeness was purely circumstantial, meaning no possibility of reconciliation. At the end of the proceedings, the lover was convicted and arrested for fraud. Olivia regained some of her dignity, but life as she had known it before was destroyed forever. His image in the community, the trust of his friends and Michael's respect would never be fully recovered. She moved to a smaller apartment, starting from scratch, slowly rebuilding herself, now aware of the irreversible consequences her actions had caused. Olivia understood in the most painful way that every wrong choice leaves deep marks, not just on her, but on everyone around her. Michael, on the other hand, emerged stronger and more self-aware from this devastating experience. Although the betrayal had shattered his confidence, it had given him stunning clarity about values, boundaries, and the importance of acting with integrity, even in the face of pain. Over time, she began attending therapy sessions, better understanding what she had experienced, recovering emotionally and focusing on what really mattered, taking care of her children and teaching them about the importance of respect, trust and open communication. His life followed a calmer path, although he still carried the internal scars of the betrayal he suffered. Months later, during a school reunion for his children, Michael met a woman named Sophie, a teacher for one of his children. Sophie, a divorcee and single mother, was kind, mature, and shared similar values to him. After informal conversations, occasional meetings, and a slow and delicate approach, they began to build a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. Michael realized that not everyone was like Olivia, and that although it was difficult, it was possible to love again with the caution and wisdom he had gained. Olivia, now alone, focused her energies on rebuilding herself professionally and emotionally, maintaining a respectful and distant relationship with Michael. Although he saw his children regularly, he felt the pain of the emotional distance his choice had created. His life became a constant and painful example of the consequences of impulsive and selfish actions. However, in his loneliness, he found the opportunity to grow as a person, accepting his mistakes and working day after day to rebuild his lost dignity, even knowing that some wounds would never be completely healed. Time, in the end, became the greatest teacher for them all. Michael rebuilt his emotional life with balance and maturity, Olivia learned about responsibility, genuine repentance, and humility, and the children, although marked by everything they experienced, grew up seeing real examples of the consequences of choices and the importance of respect, love and honesty. A family that, despite the pain, found ways to rise again, understanding that even after profound emotional destruction, it is possible to find hope and personal redemption, even if it is far from the ideal they once dreamed of. And now I want to know your opinion on this story. What did you think? Do you agree with the choices made by the characters? What action would you have taken if you were in their shoes? Share your opinion here in the comments, I really want to know what you think. If you liked this story and want to continue following other exciting narratives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel here, activate the bell to receive notifications and leave your like on this video. Remember that this channel does not and will never support any type of betrayal, on the contrary, we are here to show how betrayal destroys lives and causes deep wounds for everyone involved. Thank you for following this far, I hope this story has brought important reflections to your life. Until the next video.